Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today I want to have a little bit of a discussion. You see, yesterday we had the whole Chaos Debate blog drop and it gave us a lot of information regarding how the Chaos factions are going to interact with each other, what's the difference between Monogod faction, Chaos Warrior faction and these new God-touched factions too. But there's also something really important to talk about here, which is the fact that sub-factions are now a thing. Now yes, we've had different style factions before, but this is really important because it could potentially shape how DLC will happen in the future to a much higher quality. So, we've got here some information regarding the DLC Lords, and they say comparatively, the 4 new DLC Lords are almost akin to a sub-race within the Warriors, Lords who are more closely aligned to their specific god, and thus limited in access to their full suite of marked units, in lieu of their patron god specific units, alongside the Undivided. Now, there's loads of details there, we're not going to go over all of it, mostly because we covered that yesterday, but this is actually really important. You see, sub-factions or sub-races are something that we've been waiting for a long time. Something that just adds in a lot more flavor, radically changes stuff in a certain sense, but still has a sort of familiarity to what we're used to. The Warriors of Chaos DLC Champions of Chaos is doing that, where they're still Chaos factions, but we know, and it has been confirmed, that they have their own specific technology tree, and they're linked up to other factions to kind of make it more unique, but still feeling the same. So it's rather interesting that we're getting something like this. And yes, we have had similar stuff already with, say, for example, Nakai the Wanderer, but this is being done in a rather large scale. This means that DLC can come into effect, which is going to radically change stuff. Like if another High Elf gets introduced, he would be totally different from all the other High Elves. If another Empire character gets introduced, the same. In a very similar sense, you can compare it to, say, Marcus Wolfheart for the Empire, but I'm saying much more detailed, and it could fix a lot of characters up. It could even be great for new characters being introduced. So I'm really excited about this, and I want to talk about it a bit more. Now, it's very curious that they called it a sub-race instead of a sub-faction, because we do have sub-factions already in a sense, and generally, sub-races and sub-factions are two different things if you look at it in the terms of, well, generally Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay or even, say, D&D. But let's not worry too much, let's talk about how this could affect the possible future. So in terms of more sub-factions, well, that's going to be very similar to that of Nakai, not the same mechanics, but you know what I mean, where we have something that's radically different, the same thing as, obviously, the Champions of Chaos, so that will progress as normal, but it's nice to see that we're likely going to get more DLC in that style, as a lot of other factions, they just introduce a Lord, give him a unique mechanic and some units, and that's it. But the units are usable by everyone, the mechanic is just the only thing that's new. But obviously Champions of Chaos is adding it to a much larger degree, and it's going to allow for a lot of replayability. So if you just want to play as, say, for example, Archaon, but you want to have another playthrough of the Warriors of Chaos, you can then decide to play one of the 4 champions and have a completely different playstyle, to the point where I could say, more or less, we could expect 5 unique playthroughs, which, you know, is freaking cool. But imagine if this gets implemented for loads of other races, of course if this DLC is received well, maybe not even just for new characters that have yet to be implemented, but characters that already exist that could do with a bit of a touch-up. So, essentially, it's DLC to change them around, to give them a bit of love, and just to have a completely new playstyle in a sense. So just imagine a Slayer-themed DLC for Ungrim Iron Fist, which completely and radically changes its playstyle, where he focuses mostly on Slayer units. Like, yes, we already have a similar thing here, but I'm saying new units, new mechanics, something completely different, where if you play as Ungrim, it's not like playing as another dwarf faction, it's literally playing something completely new. So we get the proper Slayer Keep faction from the Storm of Chaos, and it's something that you would then have access to with the other dwarfs. Yeah, you know, every other dwarf would get those units, but you have it in an easier sense to recruit them, where you'd be incentivized to use dwarfs of the Slayer varieties rather than, you know, the usual Ironbreakers and Crawlers and all that type of stuff. You want to use that instead. Now, there's loads of different ways that this could be done. Once again, this is sub-factions and it could be done for loads of characters, but I don't want to go over characters. I kind of want to go over sub-races, because this could have a lot of potential for sub-races. This is factions and different races which fall under, well, anything that's already there or is yet to come. Say, for example, what could be considered a sub-race within the Empire? Well, the Cult of Ulrich, which is its own thing, and it's something that we're expecting in the near future, I'm hoping at the very least, where we could have a proper Ulrichian themed army. Every other faction could get access to some of those Ulrichian units, say for example, you know, Teutogen Guard and all that type of stuff, but if you play as Minheim, as Boris Todbringer, you would have access to those units as an incentivization. You would have state troops and so on, but you're better off only using these, or as much of them as possible. It's the idea of getting a lot of big themes there. And you know, as far as we've read through all the Warriors of Chaos rework blogs that they've been posting, there's a fair amount of them, something like this is completely possible, but that's not all. Halflings are a thing, right? Yeah, so I know some people are thinking, oh, here we go, but think about this, right? They belong to the Empire. They are members of the Empire. The grand majority of the halflings in the Warhammer Fantasy world are part of the Moot. Now, it's very hard to justify a race pack for the halflings, because let's be very honest, they don't have a lot of territory. But what if you had a faction that started in the Moot, and you had a small roster, 20 units, maybe even less. Yeah, 20 units seems like a bit much, maybe 15 units, maybe even a bit less than that. But that would be your roster, where it's a small thing with one legendary lord, maybe even two if they want to feel generous, but you've got the halflings that are represented within the Empire. The Imperial factions would be able to recruit the halflings, but if you wanted a truly unique experience, there you go. They'd still fall under the Empire because they are part of the Empire. In fact, they have a half a vote for a new Emperor. Yeah, I know. But that means that you'd be able to recruit halflings, get maybe some reinforcement mechanic like Marcus Wolfhard has, and that's how you'd get some Imperials in your forces. You could have a lot of fun with that, and there you go. Something completely new, and it doesn't demand a full race, because they just have to get a few rigs, and then obviously just reskin the rig and the skeleton itself to make more units, because we wouldn't have that much variety when it comes to a halfling faction. If you look at what the halflings actually had on the tabletop, it's not really that much. Amazons for the Lizardmen. What if the Lizardmen had access to Amazon units, which we know they're allied with, and you had a Amazon race pack, which is again a sub-race? They'd have a lot of the same stuff in terms of mechanics to the Lizardmen, few units here and there, maybe 1-2 legendary lords, I think one is perfectly fine, and 15 or so units to give you something unique. There you go. You've got something there. Now the Lizardmen would again get access to, I don't know, the Terrorbirds and all that type of stuff. Nothing too big, and maybe be able to recruit some Amazons themselves, but you know what I mean. There, you've already got access to that. Rather than making a full race pack, which would demand 4 legendary lords, which would demand this, that, and the other, it's smaller, but it still gives us what we want. There's so much potential here. I mean, we're already expecting this in the future because, well, you know, Grand Cafe and the Monkey King. We already know from lore that the Monkey King has loads of different types of monkey warriors. It's been hinted throughout the loading screens of the game too, that there's all these different types of monkeys as monkey warriors. So we're expecting him to have a heavy monkey warrior focus, and then be able to recruit some Cathayan, normal human Cathayans through some sort of side mechanic, or maybe even special buildings. You get what I mean here. So if it's possible for that, and it's possible for the Warriors of Chaos, who now have all these different interesting mechanics that we've been able to see through blogs, and obviously those Let's Plays, then who's to say that isn't possible for every race and faction, which does have attached sub-races to it. I'm really excited about the prospect of this. Obviously, we have to wait and see. Maybe Creative Assembly don't have their stuff planned for the future, but you never know. Especially if people get vocal about it, they'll likely start taking stuff more into consideration, and it's something that needs to be done. I'd say, obviously respectfully, because let's be honest, we're not really here in a position to make demands. We just want more content. They want to make more content to sell, clearly. And stuff like this just has a lot of potential for loads of new DLC, a better form of DLC going forward. And, well, yeah, we can be honest, from what we've seen of the Champions of Chaos, everything's looking good. We're going to have to wait and see because everything can look good on paper but not be good. However, so far from all the Let's Plays that we've seen, it's looking like everything's going to be really fun. The rework mechanics are always going to be quite interesting. Keep in mind that they've done a great job with the Wood Elves and the Beastmen. So, yeah, I just hope that this gets brought forward into other stuff. If DLC quality is being brought up, that every DLC is going to be of a rework level, like, it's going to be amazing for the franchise as a whole, and it's going to give us a lot of content to play over and over again. But I'm just hoping that they'll take into consideration stuff that has been brought here, especially with the fact that they mentioned Subraces, to be able to create actual sub-races, legitimate sub-races, as it'll increase the longevity of the series. And like I said very early on in the, I think it was during the Warhammer 3 hype, I'm not going to be truly happy until they add in everything. I want to see every stupid and silly thing in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, or at least as realistic as possible, being added in. And yeah, sub-races, come on, right? But let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion.